One of the first big organizations to really adopt software in a big way was the federal government. We have a lot of existing systems that you have to keep in place and keep running. At the same time, you need to deliver new capabilities because laws are changing all the time, customers' expectations are changing all the time, and so you need to be able to innovate.
As the data explodes into our environment and we're looking at how they can get closer to the data to make their decisions faster, they're dealing with not just genomic sequencing and high-performance computing and computational science analysis activities, but they're dealing with moving it into the future as they deal with today's problems.
We ought to be doing a major cyber education block for them and show them how to determine what is a high-value information asset, how to run an effective cyber education and training program, how to actually run an effective cyber operations program from the standpoint of protecting those high-value assets. You need to make it part of the curriculum and part of the job description for our senior executives. And to train those senior executives how to take that all the way down throughout their organization.
Unfortunately, too many times in any organization, we tend to be buzzword focused, right? And AI, oh, that's the new buzzword. Oh, we have to do AI. Well, really, you have to come to grips with what are you going to use it for, okay? And the biggest problem, I think, that AI can be of great value to us in my particular situation, where we provide interoperability and information sharing environments, is when it comes to insider threat. Okay, whether the insider threat may be a malicious or just poor behavior, okay, knowing that, anticipating that, and trying to come to grips with avoiding it or precluding it from coming to pass. That's what we're focused on.
I'm looking over the horizon. We sometimes like to say I'm working on technology that will benefit soldiers that in some cases haven't been born yet. 2035 and beyond.
There is so much technology that's being developed in our space, in geospatial space, in AI, computer vision, machine learning. That's not the problem. Where the difficulties are with the people and the processes, and to some degree the data. With the data, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, NGA is sitting on petabytes of data that we think we've gotten the value out of that we have, but maybe there's value in that data that a commercial company might be able to use to develop an AI algorithm or to develop a computer vision solution.
We see threats evolving, more frequent, more impactful to agency systems and data, where we're looking to see now, we're briefing not only the CIO, but we're looking to brief the senior agency official for risk management, the head of the agency. So I think what we're seeing now within the cyber infrastructure and the cyber environment is that CISOs are going to have a little bit more power to implement change, modernize systems, and better protect that system and data across the global enterprise of the federal government.
All right. Good morning and welcome to our Tech Futures in Government Forum. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have a great group of government and industry leaders here joining us this morning. So we really thank everybody taking the time to make part of your schedule for this. My name is Michael Hoffman, and I'm the president of Government CIO Media and Research. Government CIO Media and Research is the online destination for thought leadership and research focused on the transformation of government IT. Our experienced team collects the best practices and research regarding the advancing technology and management landscape. Hopefully you got a chance to meet some of our team out there during the breakfast period, talking with some of our researchers about some of our key capability areas, such as cybersecurity, data, digital, and IT transformation. We're extremely excited to have so many government and industry folks in the house, like I said, with a wide array of agencies, which is I always find one of the most important parts of our events, being able to really cut down those silos and let different agency leaders talk to each other. We're especially excited about the lineup of speakers we have to discuss some of the important issues like IT modernization, quantum computing, big data, and cybersecurity. The inspiration for this morning's event is the future of IT and the emerging technologies that will rapidly transform government over the next 10 years. The mission statement for our company is to transform government IT. As part of that mission, we partnered with George Washington University's Business School to launch one of the most ambitious surveys across multiple federal IT executives along with agencies. We teamed up to find out what federal technology leaders thought were the biggest opportunities and challenges facing government agencies over the next decade. The final report will be published in July, but we wanted to host an event this morning to preview some of the findings. and talk with some of the top IT leaders about some of the common topics that were discussed. We'll talk more about some of the early findings in the first panel, but before we do, I wanted to make a few announcements. First, we're live streaming this morning's forum so everybody across the country could watch. So hello to those folks. We hope everyone in the room and watching the live stream can take part in the conversation on social media as well. So please remember to use the hashtag TechFutures. There's also, for those here, there's also instructions on how to get on Wi-Fi inside the program. I also want to thank the sponsors who made this morning's forum possible. MicroStrategy, Forescout, and Lumina Analytics all played an important role in making this morning happen. So thank you. Before I move on to the first panel, I also wanted to take a moment to recognize 2 graduate students at George Washington University. Our CEO, Brian Moran, a George Washington graduate, established the Tony Camilleri Veteran Scholarship Fund, named in honor of his late uncle, given to high-performing veterans attending graduate school at the university. Both Brian and his uncle served in the armed forces. The 2 most recent recipients of the scholarship are John Reeves and Harold Hackstall. Congratulations to both of you. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off our first session, focused on the study on federal information technology transformation, or as we're calling it, SOFIT squared. That's right, to make it official, we had to come up with a witty acronym to make it fit in with the government parlance. Like I said earlier, this study is a result of a wide-ranging survey where we interviewed 120 federal IT executives, over 30 agencies, on a massive effort over this past year. The early findings that have been done with George Washington University have been quite stunning so far. So let me introduce some of the people so you can learn more about it. So if I could invite to the stage, first, Shubha Dasgupta, George Washington University Associate Professor of Information Systems and Technology Management. Brian Ensor, George Washington University Assistant Vice President for Strategic Planning and Initiatives. And then as well, Andrew Underhill, Government CIO's Chief Technology Officer. We'll get this kicked off. All right? Thank you very much. All right. Well, thanks again for everyone for joining us and talking a little bit about this research report that was really, quite frankly, a major inspiration, like I said, for launching the event and giving everyone a reason to come out and enjoy a great breakfast and learn as well. So to kick things off, could we just start with you guys giving a quick introduction for each other? So could we start with you, Shubha?
My name is Shubha Dasgupta. I'm an associate professor of information systems in the business school, the School of Business, and I'm glad to be here.
My name is Andrew Underhill, CTIO at Government CIO. I've been in government IT for 20-odd years, trying to engage the community and help them understand what the future looks like.
And Brian Ensor, AVP for Planning and Strategic Initiatives at GW. So my role at GW, we have Planning and Strategy Office, shared infrastructure, and then our local and regional research infrastructure.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you guys. To start, Andrew, could you talk a little bit about some of the motivations and the reason that we really wanted to launch with a research survey and study like this?
Sure. So, our forums and other activities around the company are all focused on information sharing and knowledge gathering. So one of the things we've been really successful in doing is bringing those communities together to share information. But it's really difficult to capture what the current environment looks like. It's even harder to look into the future and see what the future environment looks like. So we thought that one of the best ways to achieve a common baseline for both of those is to engage all of industry, or as much of the industry as we could. So that's where we decided to go big bang and interview over 100 leaders in the government IT ecosystem. So.
Okay, wonderful. Shubha, can you talk a little bit about some of the early, taking some of the surveys that we did? And I think one of the things to really point out is the fact that we did personal surveys. We did one-on-one interviews with those 120 federal IT executives. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to give that opportunity for those folks to really share stories, share personal anecdotes about some of the challenges and opportunities that they're facing, or see in those next 10 years. So now that we've taken a lot of that information from from those interviews. We're working with Shuba's team here over at George Washington University and some of their graduate students to do some of that analysis. So Shuba, could you talk a little bit about what some of that early analysis was? And I think we have a couple slides as well to show some of the word clouds that go along with that. Go ahead.
First, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Government CIO for this collaborative effort in researching the future of IT transformation in the government. We'd like to thank Brian Moran, Matt Van Putten, Gina Gallagher, and from my team, Professor Yijin Liu, Brianna Tucci, Humphrey Magino, and Tyler Hollis. So they might be in the audience today. I'm just the spokesperson for that for my team. So I'm just presenting what my team put together. There were 120 data points that we had, interviews as well as survey data collected from about 30 agencies by Government CIO. We were tasked with analyzing that research data. So most of the interviews, about 67 of them, were basically interviews with unstructured data, and our team put together a text-based analysis of that data. So it was primarily a text analysis of the data that was conducted. So the process that was followed was, and I'll try to be brief about the methodology that we used, was our students, Brianna and her team, along with the guidance from Yijin, put together, coded the entire transcript. So basically the audio files of the interviews were first transcribed at Government CIO, and then our students coded each of these interviews in using some technology codes, some non-technology codes, and also using some priorities that they could see in it. And then this was analyzed using text mining. And when this was analyzed, we came up with some clear ideas about what these government CIOs are looking at. What are their challenges, what are their priorities, and what are their concerns. There are a couple of word clouds that are
Yeah, can we have the slides for the word clouds brought up?
So in the word clouds, what stands out is that the first one on the general topics or the most popular ones, and I can talk about those. And one of them is what stands out is data, and it seems that data is one of the most important things that people or individuals or the federal IT is concerned about. Now, we do not have some details. We do not have details of what does data mean, and that will come up with our additional analysis that we plan to conduct over the next few months before the final report is released. There were two other priorities that showed up in the word cloud as well, and those were.
Sure, we got them.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so those were the priorities that showed up. In terms of what are considered to be the priorities are, again, data and the cloud. Those were the ones that stood out. And those are understandable because those are the focus of many different companies and in the IT workforce. But we want to get a better insight into these two things. I do not want to minimize the importance of the other things that stood out, which include technology, people. And those were also very important in all other aspects of this research. So the preliminary findings show that these are going to be very important in our results. And now what do we do need to get a little more depth in terms of our analysis. I would like to conclude by saying that in terms of the conclusions so far, the preliminary conclusions that we have reached include aspects such as the cultural adaptation. Those were terms that were used by our respondents about people and how they get adapted to technology as well as to their agencies. And those are some of the things that stood out. Communication skills, people skills, retention, all these aspects stood out in our preliminary results.
Okay. To get you involved, Brian, a little bit, we talked yesterday a bit about some of the findings and talked a little bit about some of these word clouds as well. What stood out to you, working here at George Washington University, making a lot of investments right now in big data as well as investments in federal technology. Shubha mentioned the fact that it's not all about just the ones and zeros and the tech necessarily. What are some of the things that stood out to you, Brian, as you're taking a look at some of these early findings?
Well, first, when we were going through the word clouds, I could pick any of the words and tell my own story around those. Obviously, the research is going to dig deeper into that. But when you look at some of the key ones that came out that were around people and knowledge and how data plays into all of those aspects. But one of the other words that's up on the one right now was thing that caught my attention. And the proliferation of things that are generating, consuming, moving, processing data, and that is accelerating all around us. So when we look at preparing students, engaging them in applied aspects of the type of work they're going to be asked to do when they come out of university, it looks different 3 years from now as it is 6 years from now. So how do you get ahead of some of that? How do you start to take some of these efforts to analyze and come up with findings that help you then look back into your programs and say, how do we structure our programs to ensure that our students are coming out and being prepared for the workforce? How do we partner in the right ways, both in the corporate sense and in the public sense? Some of our early relationships in DC with our research infrastructure has targeted things around sensing networks and environmental sensing networks. And so Pennsylvania Avenue 2040 project is one of those examples where you work with the commercial partners that build some of the IoT technologies. You work with your local government partners who are dealing with acceleration of urbanization and the needs of the constituents in those areas. And you work back to say, well, how do we put structures out there, build an environment that allows research to happen, education to happen, and then really advance the science in these environments. You start to generate and have to manage massive amounts of data across all these systems, but you also touch a large number of disciplines. It isn't just the technology element. It isn't just the federal administration or the local government administration challenges. You're dealing with legal, you're dealing with policy, you're dealing with public health. And so you can see how partnerships between higher education, corporate partners, and cities start to build an opportunity to say, well, we can build programs that help prepare students to work in those type of environments, work with that type of data, help analyze, generate new knowledge. And so when I look at the data, the people, the knowledge, and things, those kind of spoke to me. I'm excited to see what comes out of the report because I want to learn more myself.
Can I just add to that? I was really glad to see people up there. Because people is often, I'm CTO. Do I care about people? I do care about people, not just technology. And, because if you don't engage the people, your technology is not necessarily going to be a successful technology, right? And I think this is really interesting because the university system here can help bridge the people and IT problem.
I think people, just to continue on that, people also stood out in our analysis. So some of the conclusions, the preliminary conclusions, are all about people. It's about the skills. And what was surprising is in one of the word clouds that we came up with, there's all preliminary ones, we just had a few displayed here, but the word cloud about skills, in general, when we talk about people, the one that stands out, it's much larger than anything else, is communication. It's not even technology. It's not the technical expertise of people, of IT, or IT professionals. It's about communication. So it is those are the soft skills that are also as important to CIOs or CXOs.
Right.
And for people.
Yeah. And I think if you look at some of the design thinking movements,
right.
user experience movements that are in place today, it's linked to fixing that people problem as well. It's kind of, they're looking at an iceberg, right?
Right.
The people are using the tip of the iceberg.
That's right.
Complexities below.
Okay. So one of the things that stood out too, so you mentioned people, you mentioned things, or skills, I should say. And one of the topics that comes up a lot is workforce. And we hear a lot about, from a government perspective, of how they need to attract more people. I think, Brian and Shubha, you sit at a unique position. What are some good ways that, some of your talented graduate students especially, that you're working with, how do you get them involved to work with some of these government agencies and tackle some of the challenges that they're going to face?
I think that's a very important question. That's one of the ways we can involve. One of the ways to do this is to involve students very early in their education, and especially undergraduate students. They're looking for internships. They're looking for experience. They want to be connected to industry, both at the federal level as well as other public sector as well as private institutions. And being in Washington, they want to take advantage of those connections. And I think it's a resource that is underutilized. Especially, we have a very strong undergraduate as well as graduate workforce, a set of students who could then contribute to the workforce, maybe through internships or even part-time work. And during the summers, many do not leave Washington, D.C. to go home. They go home for, at this time, after exams and for Mother's Day, and then they come back. And then they come back and they spend the entire summer here doing internships. So that is a resource. Universities would love to work with organizations to find ways in which to involve our students in these kinds of things. For the graduate students, again, internships very early on. They can work in the summer. That's definitely an advantage. There might be some restrictions in terms of we have a larger international population of graduate students, and that's true across most quantitative fields in universities. So that may have some restrictions, but other than that, setting up these systems in which students can contribute, and I think it's a mutually win-win situation.
Great. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and engaging the students early is a critical part of helping to build a pipeline for working with students to develop what they need by the time they come out of university, that they're adding value immediately. Not that they come out of university, then they have to go through another program before they add value to the organization. Examples in the commercial space, companies working with universities to build in internships of every year for the students. So by the time they're graduating, they've gotten the experience with the company, tailored their education with the university environment to ensure that they're getting the right kind of applied skills that they need coming out the door. And making sure those opportunities are there for them. I mean, that's a real partnership. The other thing is how we adapt the programs. And Shubha, we were talking earlier about the pace at which universities can change, and how quickly we can convert a program or stand up a new program or evolve to meet some of these challenges, because the pace is rapid. And how do you look at what makes the whole student coming out and making them marketable? We get measured on where students go. How successful are they in their first endeavor after leaving the university? What's their first destination? And so what are the T skills? What are they really studying deep? And then how do you give them complementary set of broad skills that they need to be effective when communication becomes a critical word that's up there? So you think about somebody that might be in law and focused on developing that career. Well, there are aspects that they need to understand around technology. I mean, you go to a number of consulting firms today, and they've got units that are focused on the technology components or the data components. You go into the accounting field, and same thing, having to deal with the data and the technology and new technologies that are becoming disruptive. And so how do you find students that are deep in a particular area and then expose them to others? How do you have somebody in the business school getting exposure to things that are happening in the engineering school, and the right set of skills that they are truly complementary, and ensuring that you have somebody that's wholly prepared for the career that's coming out. That requires partnerships. That requires engagements with both those that are in the federal space creating job opportunities, those in the commercial space creating job opportunities, in working with universities to say, what does a program look like that really helps us get the students to the best outcomes? And I think that that is a lifetime engagement, and something that universities are actively working with many partners on trying to build out, and GW in particular looking at those cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary type of studies that help complement what might be a core interest of a student.
Okay. We talked a little bit about what we did see, that came up throughout most of those interviews. One thing that stood out, though, that to the four of us was the fact that artificial intelligence or AI did not come up often. Is there anything that stood out to you? Does that surprise you at all, Andrew, in terms of?
Does it surprise me?
Yeah.
Yes,
with so many people
due to
talking
all of
about it seems like?
Right. And a lot of it is, it's in that if you look at the hype life cycle, right? People are talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
There's not so much applied intelligence, if we're going to change the acronym there.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised that we're not talking about it in this forum, because this forum's based on evidence in the market, and that talk hasn't turned into applied applications very much in the marketplace. If you look at in medicine and radiology, they have some great artificial intelligence working there, looking up calcifications in images and whatnot. But in terms of applying it to the broader industry, we're in the very early stages of that life cycle.
Okay.
I do want to say, though, that I saw, guests, we need to work out how to get guests work out of doing business, I guess.
Guess? Yeah. Taking the guesswork out of
that's true too.
business. Yeah, and that is one of the things that we've tried to do with this survey, is to take some of that guesswork, provide some of that research, and give people the information to move forward with it.
Yeah, and to the communication point, linking it to your point on education, we have a services business as well, and what I'm hearing from my customers is that they would love to engage earlier and more often with the communities and other education environments. And I think it's partly a communication problem, and maybe a time problem as well. Time was up there. Yeah. They don't have the time to do it, and the communication channels are unknown, so I think there's a great opportunity there to help fix that problem.
I would also like to add, I think the phrase that was used by my colleague Dr. Liu was that we haven't seen the penetration in terms of AI in the federal government yet, so that it didn't show up in our interviews yet. But there was some talk. There were some CXOs did mention in the transcripts we got that they are looking into machine learning, AI options. But it's very early, like you mentioned.
Right. And people are using it, across the government space, but they're prototypes.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily production environments, and where they are, they're very limited in scope. You've got the chatbots in help desk systems.
Yeah. Brian, you mentioned robotic process automation is something that the GWU is looking at, doing more investments in. That was something that came up occasionally as well, and that's a big initiative for some of the agencies, for some of the folks in the audience right now. Is there anything that you want to expound upon with that?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of these areas that are being explored, right? And what does an AI worker look like?
Yeah.
And how does that manifest in leveraging things like robotic process automation as an evolution to business process automation, and thinking about those activities that are being done that consume a lot of people time, as there's a proliferation of data, as there's a proliferation of things creating that data, new knowledge that we're trying to generate and leverage for decision support. There's just a time and capacity thing. And so when you look at these type of technologies in that sense and say, well, how do these things start to help me manage what's in my space around data? How do I leverage the assets? It was in the video in the beginning where it's like, well, we got what we needed out of this, but what else could somebody get out of this? And these are very time-intensive things. These are very maybe critical findings that can come from these data sets that might go undiscovered or unexplored. And with the evolution of research in AI and quantum computing, and looking at how we introduce RPA into systems, that's an area of exploration. But finding those applied areas that help us to explore it with some outcome that's of interest We talked earlier off stage around the word motivation. And for me, success comes from aligning motivations. So if I have a need in the marketplace with the agencies that said, this is a real citizen challenge I'm trying to solve. This is a real government challenge I'm trying to solve. And, do I have somebody that has interest in helping me to solve that problem because they're aligned with their motivation to solve this? Maybe there's an exploration of a researcher that's looking at RPA that says, I really want to find a use case for this. And a lot of times we might evolve a research project or do an academic program or something around something without that real use case leading it. So by finding that people first experience scenario, aligning the motivations, you can start to line up what you're researching with some outcome. So I think what we're trying to do with some of our research platforms in the city government and in really smart cities, which is another buzzword coming up, looking at impact for the citizen through smart cities. How do you build a platform that allows you to research some of this? How do you partner with some commercial partners that help you build out an environment that then leverages these use cases that are provided by the agencies, by the citizens, and say we can really tackle these challenges? And now let's reach back into the assets we have with our higher education institutions across the U.S. and really apply the motivation of a researcher, which when we look at what might be the broad spectrum of your challenges, the researcher is focused on a very precise point of interest that may or may not align with what you're trying to do. And so it's a very hard thing to match up. Try and get 3 agencies to agree on a priority. Inside the university, getting 3 researchers to say this is a priority to work on, similar kind of challenges.
And you're making it personal as well. You're saying it's the user that should be driving the use cases, not the agency, right? To a certain extent.
And that's a real need for higher education and preparing our students, because then there's real impact to what they're doing, real value, immediate value out of the door. And so I think
of course, something we always forget about is Google Maps, right? That's a great application of AI today that everybody uses. So.
Yeah. But in terms of the work, and taking that a step further, in terms of the workforce question that we talked about, is that I would encourage people, institutions, organizations, agencies, do not hesitate to come to the university and tell us, this is the gap we see, these are the gaps we see in our workforce development and things like that, because we can, sometimes it's not just our preparing undergraduates and graduate students, is that it's knowing and preparing them right? We do not, sometimes we can keep doing what we do well, but we also need to know what our outside customers are telling us. Okay. We don't use the word customers in the university, though. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we only have about a minute left, but to close real quick, the theme of today is really looking forward, looking into that next decade. From some of the early findings that you guys have, what is the biggest topic that you saw that is going to have an impact on government agencies and how they're formed into the next 10 years, in 2029? We'll start with you, Brian.
I'll give the easy one at the end, yeah? While the biggest word is data, it is the things that help us to manage the deluge of data, be able to create insights, create knowledge from that, and be able to get it to be actionable. I think that is a critical problem that we have today and is exponentially growing. And it's going to be, the challenge will be, how do we partner best? Who are your most critical partners that are going to help you get intelligent about each of those emerging areas that are going to help you to then solve that data challenge that you're going to have, right? So for me, I think partnership development and establishing a very deep partnership across higher ed, commercial partners, federal partners, is going to be the only way we're going to start to chip away at these.
Andrew?
To me, it's all down to understanding, right? So it's that design thinking, early on engagement with the user community is going to drive change a lot faster than us bringing tools around and then looking for a use for the tool that we've just invented, right? So, it's the focus on the user driving need. There's a lot of examples around of people forgetting that. Even today, people will redevelop mobile apps and make them very simple to use. Then they forget about some simple feature that should be in that simple interface that's very useful for 90% of their users, right? To give you an example of that, I was at the airport using one big hotel app. I used to be able to click on one button to call the shuttle. Now the app doesn't know where I am in the country, so I've got to go to Google and do a
turn
search
your
for the
location
number.
service back on.
Yeah, so they've made it very simple and easy to use. It just doesn't do what I need it to do anymore.
Yeah. Okay. How about you, Shubha?
I think these have been mentioned before. Brian mentioned it. I think data, cloud, and people. I think those are the ones that are going to drive the next few years.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for giving us kind of an early look. And I'll remind you again, the final report will come out in July, and everybody in this audience will receive a copy of the report. Okay? Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next we're going to have our cybersecurity panel. So I'd like to introduce to the stage Daryl Eckert, who's our VP for cybersecurity. He'll be moderating the panel. Along with him will be Paul Cunningham, the Chief Information Security Officer for Veterans Affairs, as well as Shane Barney, who's the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. All right, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Well, I'm very pleased to have Paul and Shane here today. They work for two very important organizations, agencies within the federal government. I was also very happy to see security in the word cloud. I thought it could have maybe been a little bit larger, but that might just be a personal preference. So everything that we're going to talk about today with regard to technical futures has implication from a cybersecurity perspective. If we're going to talk about IT transformation, data analytics, or some element of security that needs to be included in that. So with Paul and Shane today, we're going to talk a little bit about their role in their agency and how it supports the mission, a little bit about security and privacy integration and how that's coming together a little bit more over the past couple of years. And then really look at what it takes to make a risk-conscious organization. We talk a lot about cybersecurity as providing secure, interoperable, enabled solutions, but it really comes down to the mission and their risk tolerance, and making sure that everyone understands what it really means to be risk-conscious. And then we're going to talk a little bit about workforce ourselves. The president recently released an executive order on workforce for cybersecurity professionals in the federal government that has to do with rotations, competitions, making certain taxonomies standard. And then we'll finish up with some discussion around innovation and what it takes for the CISO to drive their vision across the agency. So with that, Paul, I thought you could start by describing a little bit of what your role and day in the life of a CISO is at Department of Veteran Affairs.
Well, sure, and thank you for having me here and have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the work we're doing in VA as well as in the federal space. I think for a CISO, every day is a little bit different, so it's kind of hard to describe an actual cookie-cutter day, but there's a workflow that you kind of get into, and it usually starts first thing in the morning, like everybody else. You kind of get up, get started, and on your way out the door, you want to go ahead and check to see like what's on fire, or how quick do you have to get? Do you need to make some phone calls before you catch the ride in? And then in there, you're starting to get your strategy, and then we usually have an 8 o'clock morning call that includes security as part of the operations call, and that integration is very important for us to understand what operations activities are going on, as well as some of our cybersecurity activities, and where they kind of blend together. And hopefully everything's pretty calm, right? So obviously if there's a critical activity going on, we're probably developing our strategies from talking points, making sure the proper escalation to the right levels being done, and again, what are we doing to address the particular issue? But most days, we like to think our processes are working. So now you can just into the daily grind of running a shop. You got personnel issues, you got budget. You also have to start working around the being a good business partner, figuring out negotiations of where they're trying to go to and where you can help them do it in a more secure way. So some days actually some hours, you might be talking very technical things around the 53 controls, and then you'll leave that meeting and you're into a more strategy meeting about the larger issue around electronic healthcare records and what we're doing to partner with DoD. So that's kind of the exciting part about working at the VA, and really, I think that's similar in a lot of the other federal jobs too.
Right. Thank you. Shane?
Well, the last 24 hours, I was up till 3 a.m. working on an incident, so that's probably not the best day in life to sell the CISO role as a future career path, but that is part of the job. For USCIS, we are, as the agency responsible for the administration of immigration benefits, including naturalization, work permits, refugee, asylum. You may have heard a little bit about it in the news. We're not the enforcement side, we're the administration side. But we were responsible for a very large, very complex system that involves touch points in a lot of places. Everything that we do involves personal data of one sort or another. That part of an aspect of our mission is critical in terms of securing that information and our involvement therein, and also our work with privacy on that. But in terms of what CISO brings, interestingly enough, USCIS back in roughly 2009 or so, we had a new CIO join our ranks by the name of Mark Schwartz. And Mark brought a vision and a kind of a unique idea to the government that, the government can be like industry. We can do things like industry. We can be agile. We can do DevOps. We can do cloud. And he drove it. And part of his sayings and part of what he brought with him and his understanding was that security always has a seat at the table. And I think he just published a book on that, actually. What he meant by that is that security's role is everywhere in the organization at all times. Whether you're talking to the development teams, whether you're talking to the operations teams, whether you're talking to field support services, it really actually doesn't matter. And it just doesn't stop with just the IT folks. So it's not, I go to senior leadership meetings. I'm involved in all aspects of that aspect of the business, as well as working with other business elements within the organization that traditionally don't interact with security unless either something bad is happening or they're trying to do something that they shouldn't be doing. So it really changed the dynamics of what CISO does. It does drive for a very hectic, crazy time. My day does start very similar, where you pick up and hope nothing's burning down and nothing has happened. That was not yesterday. But generally speaking, that there's a pace to it, and it's a very fast-paced, very quick-moving environment. Because we are an agile shop, I have systems that are doing minor releases 3 times a day. I have other systems that are doing major releases every 3 weeks. It moves very, 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 very quickly. And staying on top of that and staying on top of all the innovations that those dev teams are bringing to the table, I think at last count we have almost 3,000 developers running around. That creates a lot of headache for CISOs. Yeah. Developers love to develop. And so, staying on top of that and staying abreast of those moves, and also embracing the innovations that are bringing to the table, and not being the no security shop, but being that risk-based decision making. Hey, what meets mission? How can we get from here to there and still secure the environment and still do our job? Okay. So it makes for a very interesting day, and never the same day twice.
All right, thank you. With regard to security and privacy, both of you have missions around the protection of data. Data was in the word cloud fairly prominently. Clearly we're going to talk about data analytics as one of the panels here. But we're seeing more of an integration of privacy and security, both from an organizational perspective as well as from a control perspective. VA has responsibility for the protection of veteran data. Shane, as you mentioned, there's a lot of PII with regard to the type of activities that CIS takes on. How do you see those coming together? How do you see them better interoperating and working together? I mean, you have to have good security to have privacy. That's the old adage. But how's it working in your organizations?
Well, I think in VA we have privacy under the Office of Information Security, under my shop, which is a real benefit. So they're kind of integrated in, and they're trying to get into the tempo. So it's no longer just when a privacy element occurs, does security get involved, or vice versa. And so I think that's where the real value is that we're actually working together. We're at the table. We're making big strategic decisions, and they have a voice in that strategy. And, it's important to realize that, the payload could be, intellectual property, and then it gets into privacy, and then it gets into, healthcare records, and, that has to be in the decision process when we start making these larger decisions on what compensating controls we're going to put in or how that structure is going to be put together. So privacy needs to be in there. Much like we talk about cybersecurity not being baked in, not being bolted on, it's the same that goes true with privacy. It needs to be there, and as with privacy in cybersecurity, they have a seat at the table just like we do.
Yeah, thank you. Shane?
I'm going to sit here for a moment and just think about what it would be like to have privacy reporting to me. So, in my organization, privacy it remains a separate shop altogether. And they're kind of beholden to their own path of reporting up through DHS headquarters. I think that when the privacy model came about originally and then was changed a few times over the years, it actually aligned fairly well to sort of how information security at that time operated. In other words, very paper-driven, very checkbox sort of oriented thinking. And that was sort of the model of security, and privacy modeled that. In USCIS, we've changed, and we adopted the risk framework, and then started implementing ongoing authorization and continuous monitoring. We started really pushing the envelope in terms of what we could do in terms of agile development and DevOps. And that in itself, though, kind of started pushing whereas privacy kind of stayed on their same path, and it started pushing us further and further away. And it's not that we're not good partners. It's not that they don't work with us. That all does happen, and they are good partners, and we have a great working relationship with them. But it does we become sort of like the incident response team for the privacy shop. And instead, what I'd love to see, whereas we have been aggressively pursuing building security in the beginning, the middle, and everywhere else in between in our pipelines and in all aspects of our operations, we haven't done such a great job of doing that with privacy. And the risk framework was just recently updated to include privacy as part of it, so I know they recognize that fact. What I'd love to see changed is really seeing privacy starting to come up and utilizing that risk-based thinking and mindset, and then looking how they can adapt and change. And almost embrace like an ongoing authorization process, very similar to what we use, but for privacy controls. It would be a game changer, especially for us. I know that at times they watch us move and watch how quickly we can operate and do things, and they too would love to be able to do that. They too would love to have that visibility into the systems and understand those changes and really have that seat at the table. We've made some efforts that direction. We've been working steadily towards it, but it's a long road. Being a separate shop and then also having kind of a separate reporting way of doing things up through headquarters makes some challenges for us getting there. But we've gotten a lot of support for it. So.
Great, thank you, Shane. I want to come back to the thought of a risk-conscious organization. There's better buy-in, around risk tolerance and risk consciousness from a cybersecurity perspective. Certainly at the C-suite, certainly engineers and operators understand vulnerability, risk management, those type activities. It seems though that there's still a challenge with getting the middle tier mission level business owners engaged and involved. What do you think it takes to make the organization more risk aware, making more risk-based decisions? Because that's where we need to go. That's how we need to prioritize resources with regard to cybersecurity. So how's that working in your organizations with regard to stakeholder engagement to make them more risk conscious, risk aware?
Well, I think cybersecurity as a whole, we kind of have a history of the landed no and become almost an impediment, and it almost is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they don't, if we're not included early, then we show that there's a lot of problems, but we kind of want to roll it out, and the end of the race is right there, right? You want to get to the market, and so then we kind of become the showstopper, so to speak. Whereas we're in early, we can help avoid some of those bigger barriers, and so that we can make the market on time. So, it's kind of a catch-22, and we kind of made it difficult. But over the years, and certainly over the last 3-4 years in the federal space, I've seen that, cybersecurity folks realize that we had to change. We had to change the way we look at our business partners, and not be a traffic cop, but actually be a risk broker and a cybersecurity practitioner where we're helping them, much like if you would get financial advice, they'd want to know a little bit more about your risk tolerances and your goals, and then they kind of they should be customize a strategy for you. And that's what we are doing in cybersecurity. And it takes a lot to change culture, not only those are from our partners, but internally as well. And so, but there's been a lot been done. I mean, certainly the recognition from the Secretary and the White House on the importance of cybersecurity and being there in early development goes a long way. And while we have the TOPS attention now, and we've always had the systems attention, it's that mission level we got to get to. So where we need to go and how we're going to get there is just show up every day with the promise that we're going to be a good partner, make sure we're trying to get the right information to the right decision owner so that decision can be made in an informed way, and take ownership when we do something wrong, as well as be there as a champion and a supporter for the mission when they do things right.
Yeah, thank you, Shane.
Cultural change is critical. As I mentioned earlier, Mark Schwartz, one of the things he did was drive cultural change. Very, very painful process to go through for any organization, I think, and change is never easy, but to do it as quickly as we did was very interesting. And really what we did and the solution we've ended up going or walking around is a notional idea that leadership is a team sport. And so we embraced the DevOps model and began driving both the balance of bringing operations into and with the development teams as they go. And this also includes all the elements of the business. So it's not uncommon to see the heads of our major directorates to be in the room with talking to the developers, talking to the IT PMs, talking to the program leads on the IT side, and my security folks are there as well. So that as decisions are made about, hey, we're gonna be implementing this microservice, or we're gonna be implementing this new aspect, or we're gonna be looking to FedRAMP a new process, that they are in that decision process as well, and they understand the risks, the balances, and what we're trying to achieve. There are sometimes the reach is just too great, but they are part of that decision-making process. And, DevOps has some limitations that we've discovered along the way. There's a new catch. You have to have a catch term. You always do. Of DevXOps, where X ends up being kind of that missing element of what it is your organization's missing. It could be DevSecOps. It could be, it could even be Dev AI Ops. But you begin plugging in those elements into your overall program to support it and build up that base. I can honestly say that, in terms of middle management, we've actually really been very successful at it. I'm not sure. If I were to write a white paper on it, I'm not sure I would know how to do that, because I'm not exactly sure when that process happened. But by bringing all those elements into the room, they begin to see the decisions that are being made by the development teams as they go through that process. When they're going through their scrums and they're going through and assorting their backlogs and looking at the different elements that are needed, the different user stories, they understand the risks that are being discussed and how that interplays with the mission they're trying to accomplish. So it's possible. I wouldn't say it's easy, and I wouldn't say we're 100% successful, but we do get a lot of support. And if we're at that table, and since security is at the table with them, if we take a stand on something that's just that's too far outside the tolerances for which we'll accept, they get to understand why that is. Now, I totally agree that you can't be a no shop in the modern world. No just means you get ignored. And so by always coming to the table prepared to negotiate. I love that term. To negotiate that risk and say, okay, we can't do it this way, but we could do it this way. It may take a couple extra steps, or you may lose this ability up front, but in the long term, we'll be able to achieve that objective. Those sorts of decisions and having them give them the options to make that decision, I think is critical. But in order for it to do that, security has to come to the table ready to sort of weigh all that out and also be involved enough and smart enough and educated enough to understand what's at risk. And so it's possible.
All right, thank you. On the topic of workforce, as stated earlier, DHS has the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education and the taxonomy around that. The administration just recently released an executive order where they're talking about federal employee rotations. They're talking about competition, and they're talking about making that nice taxonomy standard across the government. There's already, as was mentioned on the previous panel, we want to encourage high schoolers and college level to get involved in cybersecurity. We're aware, there's the Air Force Association, Cyber Patriot. There's competitions out there to help build that at the high school, college level. But what do you think the executive order? What do you think that means for your organizations? The idea of the rotation and the idea of the standardized taxonomy around the way you're looking at your competencies and your subject matter experts and those type of resources.
Well, I think it highlights a very big issue that we have in the federal government that we've known for a long time, or actually in just the industry as a whole, and that is we have a gap in the workforce. And part of that is the part where, an individual might be in a position for a long, long period of time, and they know that one thing very, very well inside that silo organization. But we realize that while that historical side is very important, that by going out and working at other agencies and seeing other things, you're actually now providing a more of a cross-pollination of ideas, thoughts, and bringing in those great, this is what worked, what didn't work, is probably just as important. So we can build a more homogeneous workforce that allows people now to not look at necessarily that I work for VA or I work for Department of Energy, but I work for the federal government, and I'm a valued asset in a bigger organization than just the siloed part or sub-agency part. So I think that's the critical recognition, and also kind of it's a forcing function that needed to be there, removed part of the barrier of not moving it in the priority queue high enough to get that standardized, what's a cyber intel subject matter expert, what's that mean to me, and what does that mean compared to my counterpart in DoD. As we start kind of aligning those a little bit closer, it makes it a more pleasant experience for the workforce to realize that they have more opportunities, which will hopefully keep them into the federal government, whether they stay in the agency or not. It's a win for the federal government. Also bring in new talent where I'm certain some folks in here might have applied for a job at one agency and the description is totally different than another agency, but it's the same job, same skill set, and they got to retool their whole resume or their responses. But now they'll be able to apply not only to one job and then apply to another job using the same standard language, but hopefully we get to a point where I can put out one position and just say VA, make a certain description, and from those candidate results, I can share those with not only other elements inside VA, but maybe to Small Business Administration or DHS, and they can pick from those. So really, it's that's the kind of the panacea of where we want to go to, right? That's where we need to be. But I think we're going to be a lot closer with this sort of attention put on it.
All right, thank you. Shane?
Workforce is an ongoing issue. The entire mission is driven by resources, and that includes people. Funding, you can have all the funding in the world. If you don't have people to execute the funding, it does you little to no good. The federal government and the way we've done cyber to this point, and within the series and grades and different things that how we've approached it, there's always been these sort of limitations in much of what he's mentioned in terms of sort of the same position but different descriptions all over. They're not really, it's hard to tell who's who or how they're being utilized. What I may refer to as a cybersecurity engineer is not necessarily the same thing at some other shop. I know for me, all my cybersecurity engineers are required to be developers because the future of security is development. But at the same time, the ability to share resources across the organization, especially when you can find within the federal space organizations that are centers of excellence. My organization has a tremendous amount of cloud experience. We're 90% cloud or something like that now. We understand cloud. We know we've been through that. We've got all the scars and the battle wounds. We've learned a lot of really important lessons. And so as organizations are making that leap into the cloud from more on-prem, organizations to cloud-based organizations, that the ability to share that experience out is critical, and to do it in more of a detailed fashion. So the ability to do rotations through organizations, I think, is going to enhance the overall workforce. But one of the larger issues, and I'm not sure how much this is going to get addressed with the executive order, is what about retention? The government is unbelievably good at bringing in, and we do this, we'll bring in fresh talent. We'll hire somebody fresh out of school or fairly close to fresh out of school. We'll rapidly accelerate them up the GS scales, through ladder programs and other incentives, and we'll give them cyber retention pay. We'll do some really great things. And then on top of that, we're going to train them like there's no tomorrow. We're going to give them every cert there's out there known to man. And then on top of that, as they get a little more experience, we're going to put them in front of all these vendors because that's their job as a federal employee. And then my friends at Cisco or AWS or Google or insert, various vendor here suddenly says, hey, I really like you, kid. You got to come work for me. And they offer them $200,000 more a year than I could ever hope to pay, and they're gone. I'm sure any CISO, any CIO could tell you all the horror stories of having that exact same experience where you're losing some of the top talent to these organizations. And that's legitimate. I mean, it's the American dream. But at the same time, it really hurts us. And that's a difficult gap to breach. At the end of the day, everyone would say, oh, well, money's not everything. Well, that's usually you say that if money's not that important to you. But, if you're looking at the larger picture of things, and not only that, the opportunity to expand their horizons within AWS or within Google or any of these vendors, that's very appealing. So the rotational thing does offer that horizon capability within the federal space. We still need to figure out how we're going to retain our employees in a longer term thing, whether that's through, better exposure within the federal space so they get a greater kind of depth of knowledge in terms of the entire cyber mission. I've got people who've made the transition from being risk managers to more like cyber engineers and incident response people, to also, giving them greater opportunities both on salary side as benefit side. There's been a lot of discussions around that. So I think we still have some challenges on the way ahead of us that we need to address. But I think the attention being applied to it with the executive order and of course the bill that's currently being worked through the House and Senate, I think those are going to start adding in, kind of giving us those extra tools, those extra pieces that we need to help retain that workforce, train that workforce, and then ultimately share that knowledge out. I would love to see also better integration with industry on the workforce side. So those are all things that need to come.
Right. Thank you. So we have just a little bit of time left. We'll wrap it up with one last question. Innovation. The theme of today's discussion is tech futures. And, you mentioned multi-cloud environments, DevSecOps, people process technology. There's got to be not just doing things faster, but, improving them, making them more efficient. What are some of the innovations that you look to as a CISO in your agency to help drive your vision across the organization to accomplish what you need to accomplish?
Well, I think the first part is, and I'll try to make it quick over time, is understanding that the speed at which technology is changing is incredibly fast. But think about technology as a whole is a lot slower than cybersecurity and what we've seen in the threat vectors. So what we need to do is understand that as tech's changing, we need to speed up and be more sensitive and bring solutions that they can, and almost in a what I call Lego format, start putting in pieces and parts of cybersecurity instead of chasing one set of controls. They can inherit, if they do this, they inherit all these controls. If you do this, you inherit another set of controls, and you can stack your solution. So almost as we talk about software as a service, we probably, I hate to belabor the jump on the as a service, but we've got to start thinking ourselves as a cybersecurity group as a service, so we can be more agile in responding to the agile developments around APIs and technology.
Thank you. Shane?
USCIS is a different position, being more or less cloud-based, and the way we operate now, we sort of are starting to have one of my colleagues in a different department made the comment that we have first world problems in terms of cloud, because we're now looking at, well, we're in cloud, so what can we do to innovate on that? What can we do to further our visibility, further our ability to innovate as well as secure? I do get worried that the innovations that are being driven by the dev teams, by the business, we can't always get in front of or don't even understand enough about it to even understand what risks are there. And so I couldn't agree more that we need to be able to, security as a shop, there needs to be this agile notion to what security is doing in order to keep up with that pace. At the same time, you've got to have the people on your side who understand the technology from sort of a risk perspective and a security-based perspective, and that's really key. These are your kind of super brains. These are the people who understand things at levels that, hurt your mind. But they can go in there and they can say, well, yeah, on the surface it's this, but really we can do this, this, and this on the back end and be okay with it. Because, as a person who enjoys the shiny objects and I totally get the shiny object syndrome concept. I also understand the risks associated with shiny objects and all that goes into that, because sometimes once you get a hold of the shiny object and you're starting to move on to the next, that first shiny object, which isn't as shiny as it used to be, suddenly falls to the wayside and becomes unsupported and becomes even a larger risk for the organization. So, learning to better wrap our hands around that innovation and become part of that innovation partnership, I think is really critical to the future.
Okay. Thank you. I think our time is up right now. Michael?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. All right. Thank you much, Daryl, Shane, and Paul. Thank you. That was fantastic. All right. Our next panel discussion is going to be focused on IT modernization. So if I could invite our next three speakers. We're going to start with Alex Brown. He is our VP for IT transformation at Government CIO. Next, we'll also have Major General Lee Payne, Defense Health Agency's Assistant Director for Combat Support and MHS Electronic Health Record Functional Champion. Finally, Beth Killeran, General Service Administration's Deputy CIO. Thank you very much, and I'll let you take it from here, Alex.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good morning, and thank you again for joining us today. As you know, the theme for this particular forum is Tech Futures, with an emphasis on understanding what is next for federal government technology. I think you'd agree that over the last 3, 4, 5 years, there's been a great deal of momentum supported by legislation to position and tool the federal government to respond to trends that necessitate that we modernize and transform the way we deliver. With that as a backdrop, can you talk to the audience a little bit about some of the major transformation and modernization activities that you have within your respective organizations? Mr. General Payne, we'll start with you.
Well, Alex, first, thanks a lot for allowing me to be here. It's a pleasure. I'm a little bit of an outlier in this room. I'm not a chief information officer. I'm not even a chief medical information officer. I'm at the end user part of this business. I'm an emergency physician. I've been in the Air Force for 32 years, and I began my career in the emergency department. Pretty chaotic environment, we weren't using stone tablets to document when I arrived in the emergency department. They were phasing that out as I got there. But we documented in a place where, on paper, with carbon copies, most of which was illegible. We frequently didn't have access to the patient's record, or if we could get it, it would take hours. If the patient was unconscious and didn't have family there, we were completely reliant on the paramedics, if we could find them, to talk about that. And across my career, I've been involved, though, in several. In fact, my career spans all of DoD's involvement in electronic health records. CHCS-1 was implemented when I was in the emergency department at Madigan. And throughout my career, the current electronic health records were, I was a hospital commander at one of our major medical centers, where I experienced firsthand sort of the ferocity of people's resistance to change as we went from the old record to the new record. Even at one point in my career, I was early in the 90s, I was trying to implement an emergency medicine patient record system, EMPRESS, but it was really way ahead of its time. I've been involved as the AFMOA commander with the digitization of our records and transfer of those records to the VA. I've deployed multiple times to Iraq and Afghanistan. And in my last job before I came here to the DHA, I was involved in aeromedical evacuation, and we have to document in the far forward areas of the world, as well as in the back of airplanes as we move patients across the globe. So we are engaged in a couple of different major transformation efforts right now. The Congress has given us a lot of guidance. National Defense Authorization Act of 17 and 19 really changing the way we do business, going from sort of 3 healthcare systems to really the administration and management. The great transformation involves the TRICARE contracts, but also the administration and management of the military treatment facilities are going from the services to the Defense Health Agency. That's a big effort. And in our modernization realm, we are moving into MHS Genesis, which is our new electronic health record, which is lots of pieces, but the Cerner Millennium product is the medical piece of that, and the Henry Schein is the dental piece of that. And I would say that finally, before I turn it over, is interoperability is critical for us as we've moved forward. From the time, if you think about when I started my career to where we are now, obviously the VA in 2017 decided to purchase the same record we're purchasing, so that's a key factor as we move forward. And the fact that 60% of our care is done in the network. We need to get, through health information exchanges, we need to get that information to our clinicians as we move patients in and out of the network care. So lots of transformation and modernization going on in our realm.
Great. Beth?
I'll kind of piggyback on what you just heard. So I think if for folks that have either been in the government for a long time or are just new, any particular industry will ping pong back and forth. So some of the things that, were popular technology-wise, 20 years ago, whether it was managed services or macros or, whatever that capability was, they're similar types of technology, but it has advanced. So instead of macros, you now have RPA. Instead of, a cloud managed services and joint hosting, you now have the cloud, which is allowing another vendor to really handle that infrastructure need for you. But so at GSA, they have really taken that and adopted it and moved forward not only with, cloud acceleration, but really looking at what I think is going to be the true technology accelerator, which is going to be the artificial intelligence and machine learning, not RPA, because that's really helping to modify and automate your business process. But in other sectors across the United States and the world, they have been working alongside machines, where machines are actually doing jobs, not augmenting and supporting people that are doing the jobs. Think of an assembly line where you actually will have people working next to a machine that's assembling a car. I think that that's really where technology is going to be taking us. So instead of you're using a laptop to do your job, or you're using a cell phone, you're going to be doing part of a job, and there's going to be some type of technology that's actually doing a job on its own. And we have to think about how, as we heard from the last group, are we looking at our workforce and how are we looking at technology to make sure that we all understand how you are going to want to do your high value work and how this technology is going to do the low value work, the things that maybe are taking a good chunk of your time today, but really is not adding value to your life or not adding value to the overall mission, but it's the things we have to do, whether it's mandated reporting, regulatory kinds of activities, compliance-based activities. How can we use our technology advances, especially in the areas of artificial intelligence and machine learning, to do that work that we have to do, so that we can really focus on that analytical capability, providing those medical services to patients, doing the research to advance, the cure for cancer, to be looking at how we can actually, prevent the next terrorist act. How can we allow you to do that high value work and allow the technology to do the other work that we have to do that right now is probably taking a good chunk of your time? And at GSA, that's really where we have been investing and looking at those initiatives, both within our agency and how we can partner and support other agencies such as USDA and others that are looking at these particular journeys and figuring out how we start pockets, build on some pilots and some initial projects and technology that we can, learn from it, and then catapult very quickly forward.
Good, thank you very much. General Payne, I was thinking back to our prep discussion we had last week, and I have to say, when I hung up the phone from speaking with you, I called Michael Hoffman and I said, he's passionate about what it is that he does. And he said, yeah, absolutely he is. So with that, I expect that there is a vision that is clear as day in your mind about the transformational impact MHS will have over the military health system. And I'd like some insight from you on that. And particularly, I'd be interested in understanding why now. I know you spoke about that earlier, but it seems like now is ripe. We have you at the helm, and it seems like the right thing to do at this point. So just a little insight from you on that.
Okay, thanks. I think, let me step back just a little bit. You know, when you think about our legacy systems, I think they served us well, but they kind of reached their end of life. So we really shifted gears in 2012, 2013, began to look at changing our acquisition strategy. Things that we had really sort of developed in-house, we turned that over to the acquisition professionals and said, buy us a commercial off-the-shelf system, a cloud-based system that we can use, much like you would purchase any major weapons system or business system. And what does that give us? It gives us a system that's in use across the globe already, that's taking care of patients safely with high quality across many hospital systems. It gives us one of the things that's really exciting about this is we get regular upgrades. In fact, just last month, at the end of last month, we conducted a major upgrade to our system and put the most current software out there. And that goes on for 10 years, multiple upgrades. And it also engages us in the community of the people that are using this system. Eventually it'll be the VA, but we're engaged with other commercial partners that use Cerner Millennium about how they're transforming and improving care, and then we get to contribute to that. So it's almost like crowdsourcing in terms of, you know, obviously Cerner makes the decision about what they're going to put in their record, but we can certainly influence that. So the acquisition strategy changed for us, and I think that's where our legacy systems were. The commercial markets moved forward, and I think, and the Cerner product is also very configurable, which helps us in DoD. The other thing that we've done, I think, and this will resonate with you all, is the IT infrastructure needed to be improved. And we are seeing that on a daily basis. We have the medical community of interest. It's a MedCoy, as we call it, is a DISA-provided service that it will eventually be at all our DoD facilities. We're out in front of that now, beginning to push that across the enterprise, and the VA is also moving in that direction. The other thing that we've learned a lot about is medical device interfaces. There's thousands of medical devices at our facilities, and I know it's going to come as a shock to you, but we didn't all purchase the same thing. So as we try to connect those things, the other thing I've learned is that medical devices are a big cybersecurity risk. We've got to make sure that those devices are secure, and so we're working through that process. And eventually, I think we're going to be. I think this, for me, the biggest part of this whole thing, Alex, is this is transformational in the sense of back to how do we provide safer, higher quality care. Using the electronic record as a tool and not as a barrier to that care. I think that's an important part of where we're headed. I also believe that when we get finished with this, both in the DoD and the VA, 20 million beneficiaries will be under our care. We're not only going to be able to influence the healthcare record marketplace, we're going to influence the medical device marketplace, and I believe we may have a chance to influence healthcare in this nation.
Very good. Thank you for that. Beth, this next question is for you. I've been in management and technology consulting for 23, 24 years. And GSA has long been recognized as a leader in innovation. With securing applications, reaching higher velocity in terms of the ability to respond to the new feature sets and functionalities of the end user. How have you leveraged frameworks like DevOps and DevSecOps to address aspects of modernization from legacy applications?
So thank you for the question. So GSA has really done exactly what you said, which is how can we continue to be out front within the federal government? How can we make sure that we are looking at some of those frameworks and best practices, put those into our environment, and then use them as catapults to escalate and advance technology? DevSecOps is just one of those tools. So within the GSA, we have a couple of main lines of business. Federal Acquisition Service, which has the largest volume of acquisitions in the government, and we have a number of federal agencies, including DoD, that come frequently to the organization, and so we have to have systems that are expandable and up to date. So I'm going to say that think about this from an environmental perspective. What we have found as a community, as a nation, as a planet, that ecosystems matter, and you have to make sure that you have all the pieces of the ecosystem in order to survive. And in some cases, if you take one small thing out of it, whether it's a plant, it's an animal, it's water, the entire ecosystem doesn't thrive. And the same thing happens with technology. So for those of you who have used Agile, you understand that you need to have the business there all the way through. And what DevSecOps does is it puts the rest of that community together. So not only do you have the engineers and the developers there, you also have your security folks and the operators all in there together as you start thinking about from ideation all the way to operations. But you also need to make sure that you have your business folks there still with from your Agile perspective. You need to make sure you have your acquisition folks in there, and potentially legal and any other people that that are part of that ecosystem. The other part of it, though, is that in order to have the acceleration that you want, what can you automate through technology? First of all, to help to decrease human error, to improve the acceleration, make sure that you're documenting and understanding what kind of code that you're building, and then you can actually put it through this kind of assembly line kind of concept that I talked about earlier and move it forward as quickly as you can, but you can make sure it's secure, you can make sure that it's tested, you can make sure it's validated, and you can make sure that it's documented and housed and even archived as you move it through the process, which then allows you to accelerate it faster. And that's what we've really adopted. And we have different applications that are at different stages of that. And as your teams mature, you can add more technology to it, which then accelerates that process. And so you can take things that might have, from an Agile perspective, gone from, it was originally 2 years, you got it down to Agile to be in 8 months. You could use this type of methodology and get it down even further. It could be days and weeks to be able to have applications and segments of it that you can move to users. Because at the end of the day, we are all here for the mission, and I think so many people either want to be part of the government because of the huge and varied mission we have, but we need to make sure that we're delivering to them because they're there on the front lines trying to do that mission, trying to help our citizens, and saying it's going to take us 2 years is just not doable anymore.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. General Payne, you spoke earlier about the MHS Genesis providing not just better care, but I think efficient care across the DoD. In what ways do you see this providing standard care across the DoD? So I think the efficiencies are solid. I think you achieve efficiencies a lot of times through standardization. Mm-hmm. But just curious to understand your thoughts about what it will do for the organization writ large.
Thanks. I think that's a great question. And for me, this is where the transformation really occurs. We were out in the Pacific Northwest looking at MHS Genesis last fall with Secretary Shanahan, and he's obviously got a big background in industry and lean processes. And he pointed out to us that rigorous adherence to standards unlocks creativity and innovation. So if you don't know where your process is or where your workflow is, it's really challenging to improve it. So as we look across our enterprise, I've struggled to understand what we mean by workflow, but as you all think about your own healthcare experience, you might make an appointment by calling on the phone. You might do that online. You show up for your appointment, you get checked in at the front desk, you get evaluated by the nurse, you get put in a room, the provider comes in and interacts with you. You might then go to the laboratory, x-ray, or pharmacy. All those are pieces of multiple different workflows. As we look at workflows across our enterprise, we're taking 3 hospital systems. We've discovered so much unwanted variation as we look not only between services, but between hospitals within services and even inside of big medical centers. People do things very, very differently. And in a cloud-based system, the workflows have to be the same. So for me, standardizing these workflows, the product is configurable. So if we have clinical practice guidelines, we can inject those into the system to make people do certain things. We can put hard stops if we find that there's a safety issue there. And then eventually all our data will be in a platform within Cerner, both our data and the VA's data, in a platform called Healthy Intent. So the questions that we're going to be able to ask and answer, I think, are going to be hugely powerful once we get this record fully implemented.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. The next question is for both of you, and I think this is the doozy. So generally, most people are interested in new and different and better. It oftentimes comes with some pain, right? There are challenges associated with it. I know in my time in federal government, on the vendor side, I've seen the organizational inertia to change. I've seen the preference to do things the old way because it seems to work better. And so there are several challenges. I'd be interested in understanding what challenges you're seeing in moving your initiatives forward, and what have been the lessons learned associated with them.
Please.
Okay. Well, for us, change management and training have been 2 huge things. It's shocking to me how tightly people will cling to a record that I know they don't like because of the unknown of what they're going to have to do to transition. So one thing we've been trying to do is for clinicians, if I can show them we're going to take better care of your patients, we're going to make information more available to you. I think that we can usually, get a higher level message for them as terms of why we're making this transition. They're willing to go through that. They're willing to make those changes. But the one thing we've uncovered is you probably can't do enough change management and training. It's about communication. It's about sharing information with key stakeholders and making sure you're touching all the right people. So we're redoubling our efforts on change management. The only limiting factor is they actually have real jobs to do every single day. So you can't be constantly, pushing them with change management strategies. So you got to feed them a little bit at a time over a long period of time. We're working hard on that right now. We're in the next fall in September. We're going live with our next 4 sites. We've produced a change management strategy. We're working extremely hard on having them adopt their workflows, and we'll see how that goes. And I'm sure we'll learn lessons as we go live at our next wave site. Training has been another very, very important process that we've learned. I think our initial training was more about how to use the system. Where do you move the mouse? Where do you touch? That has not worked well for us. So we moved to more of an industry standard organization class that looks at EHR functionality, has recommended using peer experts. So we've moved to training, advanced training people. So emergency physicians will train emergency physicians, critical care nurses train critical care nurses, OR technicians will train OR technicians, but they'll be a little bit more advanced. They need to be able to coach their peers, and that's been shown to be a lot more effective. So we've redefined our entire training approach as we're moving into to the next wave, and I'm sure we'll make adjustments as we move forward in that as well.
So I will start with So there is a book, and if anyone has read it, they probably understand this. So for anyone that is undergoing any type of change, whether it's technology or something, the tiny little book of Who Moved My Cheese tells you exactly, and everybody's laughing, that tells you what you need to plan for. You're going to have the early adopters, right? Which are the people that are, they're just sold on it because it's absolutely the best, or they used it at home, or whatever the thing might be. And you're going to have the poor little mice that get left behind and die because they just did not want to go. They are absolutely certain that if they stay and hang out here long enough, the organization is going to shift back, or the leadership's going to change, and I'm going to be fine because I'm going to sit here. And there's going to be some that, you coax them a little bit, and they're going to move, and then there's going to be some that, they're the last staunch. And realize that you're going to have all four of those categories. And you have to have different mechanisms in order to engage each of those populations, because you want to have all of them on board. And even the one that wants to stay behind, there's reasons that they're concerned. Either there's been a lot of change and upheaval in your organization, and they've seen this kind of ping pong back and forth, and they've just entrenched themselves to I'm just going to stay here because this too shall pass. But figure out why they're in those particular different categories, and how can you meet them in the middle. The other part of it too is you've got to have a strong executive champion, right? Because if you do not have the leadership at the top that continues to drive and support the change, the inertia that happens in the middle is going to overpower the change. And so think about, your different messaging. It can't just be, you go in front of the room or you talk to your employees. There's got to be different levels of communication. There's got to be different levels of engagement based on the populations. And having some of those folks that are both at the early adopters and at the far end, the laggards, having them part of those requirements, the testing and the actual process to move it forward will actually make a cultural shift. If you just try to drag them along or kind of think that maybe they'll leave on their own, then that means that as leadership changes, it will change the culture back because it hasn't sustained on its own. You need to make sure that you're building that from the ground up and understanding at the end of the day what is most important to your employees are, how can I make sure I get my job done? How am I going to be recognized for my performance? How do I make sure that I'm looking at my future career? And why is this important to me, and why is it important to this agency? If you can do those things, you can make any change happen.
Well, thank you. So I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. Do we have any questions in the audience? We have one. I see the gentleman in the back question.
Yes, General. Yes, General. Good morning to you and everybody, and thanks for the Governor ICO to have this event. My question is this. People that participated in the armed forces and they go to different screening and process in the medical process, their records, they don't match with, they don't talk with the Veterans Administration. And even sometimes if you go in a hospital like in Bethesda Hospital doesn't have what the patient has been seeing at the VA hospital. Is there going to be any sort of arrangement so the patients themselves, their whole medical history can be cross-related?
That's a great question. Let me say, even today, we share more medical record information through a product called the Joint Legacy Viewer. I think we have 416,000 users across the DoD and VA. That's how we actually see our records in our legacy systems for our sites that are on MHS Genesis as well. So you can go into the VA. The VA can go in and see DoD records, and DoD can go in to see VA records. We share more than I think any two healthcare systems in the country. Obviously, that's not as seamless as we would like it to be. So where we're headed, though, with DoD and the VA on a single instance of this record, we're going to be on the same record. That's going to be hugely powerful for us because we're seeing it in the Pacific Northwest. We're seeing, I'll give you an example, one of our commanders at one hospital is a urologist, and she goes to the other hospital, the bigger hospital, Madigan Army Medical Center, to practice. She doesn't have to go to the IT department. She has to get privileged and credentialed at that facility to go to work, but she just plugs in her CAC card and she is live in the system and she can use, so she bypasses all that. So you can imagine as we do that with the VA, not only is the veteran's record going to be there, we won't have to ship it like I was talking about, digitize, put it in HAMES, push it over to the VA. The same record will be there. We're also putting this record, MHS Genesis, is going to be in the Coast Guard. It's going to be at the military entrance processing centers, so it will be there when we're on active duty. When we're deployed, we're going to connect this record in low bandwidth and no bandwidth environments, care in the airplanes. As far forward as we can begin to collect data, we're going to do so. And then that record will be available when I retire and I become a official veteran. My record will be there in MHS Genesis. So I think we're on the right path for DoD-VA sharing of information by this joint record. Just today, I was on the phone with my colleagues. They're in Kansas City. They're having a nursing practice summit with the DoD and VA to work out how are we going to do these workflows. And sometimes the VA has great ideas and we adopt those, and they're adopting some of our ideas because we're a little ahead of them. Their first go live, I think, is in 2020. So I think it answers the mail on DoD-VA interoperability.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to take one more if we can get one for Beth.
We've got one down here.
Where? Okay, great.
Hi, so for Beth, any initial lessons learned or best practices from the USDA modernization experience that you will carry forward?
So thank you for the question. Yeah, so we actually have a number of lessons learned from that, which is, how to come in and kind of consult. And we have a number of playbooks at GSA that we have had, and we've documented those successes. But then how do you make sure that you're pulling the right plays out of those playbooks, because each environment is different. And so you can't just say, I'm going to pull out page 5 and USDA is going to use page 5. It's how do I take page 5 and modify it based on this mission and the unique culture and requirements that they have, and to make them successful. And then we've tried to do the same thing at HUD, which was the second kind of Centers of Excellence organization. And we found out, it helps us to be able to kind of teach them how to do the things themselves, because at the end of the day, the federal employees that are there in the organizations need to be self-sustaining over time. You can't come in and kind of parachute in, save them, and then parachute back out. And so that's one of the big lessons learned, which is how do we take some of the successes we have in the people that can mentor, similar to what we just heard from the DoD side, mentor them, make sure they understand and can do that, and then watch them on their own, and then start backing out, right? And I think that's one of the big lessons learned, which is there is no, kind of a triage team to come in and just save the day. It has to be, how do you take some successes you've had, show them, because each environment's different, but we can take enough of it to be able to kind of rinse and repeat. And I think that's a big lesson learned, and I think we're getting ready to do that for a third here very shortly.
Thank you.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. And on behalf of Government CIO, I really want to thank you for your time and your insight. And we appreciate you coming out.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, General Payne. All right. We have one more panel session for the day. I know this morning's gone quite long, but this might be one of the ones I'm most looking forward to. So what we have is the Data and Digital Breakthroughs panel discussion here. And what we're going to do is we're going to invite Managing Editor Amy Kluber to the stage, as well as Sanjay Gupta, who is the SBA's Chief Technology Officer, Joy Witt, who is the Presidential Innovation Fellow working with VA, and then finally Jake Taylor, who's the interim director for the brand new White House National Quantum Coordination Office. So, Amy, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks.
Sanjay, we should.
Okay, so closing out this event, really exciting. I'm going to leave it to these guys to really talk about their expertise in areas in this field. So let's just get started. I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves and what you're focusing on at your organizations. Jake?
So my name is Jake Taylor, as Brian mentioned so kindly. I wanted to say I'm working at the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. And over the past year and a half or so, we've been focused on developing a national whole-of-government approach to exploring quantum information science, which for this crowd includes quantum networking and quantum computing. And that culminated, the first year culminated in the signing of the National Quantum Initiative Act by President Trump in December of 2018. And this year, we're focused on standing up the national coordination effort, which is both an office hosted at the White House and an interagency effort across 13 different federal agencies, which is focused on how does quantum information science progress as a science, and how do federal agencies continue to adapt as quantum information technologies impact their mission space. And it's this latter part that I think we're primarily going to focus on today, because you just heard about how change is hard and how working through change in IT is a long-term process. You can imagine that when the fundamental way we compute is changing, that those changes are going to be particularly hard. And it is only through conversations like this and engaging with this community that we can keep the awareness moving, so that when you are asked, hey, are we buying quantum cloud services today? You know what they're asking. Anyway, I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll pass it over.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sanjay Gupta. In case you're thinking about the other person on CNN, that's not me. Anyways, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Small Business Administration. I come from the private sector. I've been in my positions for the last 2 years and about 4 months. And so I bring a lot of creativity, innovation, and enthusiasm about making change. Data has been an important aspect of my journey so far and continues to be here at the SBA. And I'll talk a little bit more about how data is relevant, why it is important, and what are we doing at the SBA with the data.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joy Witt. I'm a Presidential Innovation Fellow, specifically working with the U.S. Digital Service Team at the VA. Presidential Innovation Fellows, we sit with the Technology Transformation Services, which sits under GSA in government. And our kind of jobs are to work with senior level staff, but also all levels of staff, on how we can integrate technology to make the customer service experience better. And so our fellows are embedded in the VA, FDA, NIH, and several other agencies. My background is coming from actually DC Gov with the mayor's office, where I worked on an economic intelligence team. I found, and I'll talk more about this later, but I found that obviously when working with technology, a lot of it is working with people, and the major goal is to get people on board with you and also get them to trust you and for you to trust them. And so I just like to say the previous panel, they were excellent panelists, and I'll probably be saying a lot of more repetitive things that they mentioned.
So with these particular focus areas, can you highlight each of you some challenges that are brought on by the government atmosphere? Maybe Joy, you can start.
Oh, sure. So I just started as a fellow about 3 or 4 months ago, but because I had experience with DC Gov, a lot of the challenges we're facing aren't new to me, which makes things a little easier. I think what happens is, especially within the VA, it's a very large agency, right? And even comparing it to DC government, there's 10 times as many employees at the VA as there is in DC Gov. And that's just a lot of people. So when you're implementing ideas and technology and you want everyone to get on board, it's like trying to get a large city on board with your idea and for them to implement it. So I think a lot of the challenges is actually getting folks to trust you in the work that you're doing, and actually sitting back and listening to their concerns, because if they're not buying in your ideas, then they're going to be reluctant to implement those. Yeah.
Okay. Sanjay, do you want to add?
Yeah, so there's really 3 fundamental tenets that I'd like to kind of talk about. And I've done extensive work, and in my prior lives in the private sector, I've also worked on this area, which is, if you think about data, data is the currency of the digital world. So that's a pretty profound impact if you think about and you start looking at data in that manner. What does that mean to is the second aspect of that is if you think about monetizing data. I know in the federal government it means a very different thing than the private sector, but I'll kind of share with you some of the examples of how you can still monetize data while still in the federal government. And the third and the most important aspect is how do you leverage data to inform better decision making? And I know there's been a act that was recently passed about evidence-based policy making, data-based or something like that. I guess I cannot remember the exact name on that. But the point is data is supporting your decision making and allowing you a fact basis to make some of those choices you're making there. So I'll talk about those three elements. Yes, definitely the federal government looks at data in a different way. My belief is that we're sitting on a treasure trove of data in the federal government. It's up to us to how do we expose the data in a meaningful manner, in a protected manner, in a safe manner, and be able to leverage the data assets we are using. And there are many examples, and I don't want to go into those examples of how public-private partnerships have been able to leverage the data and use it for the common good. And I think there is much more potential in that domain than we probably are utilizing, but I'm certainly encouraged by what we see coming from the OMB in terms of how we want to use data more effectively. So we'll talk more about it later. Jake?
I'd actually like to emphasize that point a little bit, that when you look at, and this comes back to the challenges that I have to confront, there's also a geopolitical angle to data, right? It's as a value here and elsewhere, and there are different governmental approaches being taken around the world to leverage those data for their local domestic benefit and to maybe for other purposes as well. And so when we talk about how do we make change within the government, we can't do it in a vacuum where we're the only customers in the room. And I will say that this comes back to the other great challenge, particularly in coordinating multiple agencies on a topic. If you ask, why are we as a nation implementing a wide-scale quantum information science related research and development program, a whole of government program? And the answer is primarily that in the last 5 years, the field had moved from a pure research field to a pure research field with large technology companies and many startups investment and engagement. So this is a unique challenge in the federal government, is how do you work with private stakeholders who have fiscal investment in the space, with public stakeholders who have their own strong investment because of both their mission space and also because of geopolitical considerations, and how do you balance the economic growth, the national security implications, and the actual scientific progress and progress for society and the citizens of our society. And these balancing acts are delicate, and they require a large degree of community building, community engagement, and some of these things are not unique to the government, but I will say that wide swath I just described is really something you primarily encounter in the government decision-making process, and one that I'll be happy to talk to more.
So let's move in the partnership direction. I'm sure all of you could speak very eloquently toward that. So Joy, you made it a point to say that it's not so much about the technology, it's about the workforce. So how important are relationships here in the data space?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is also just like hiring the end user as well. I think the VA does a good job of it. I think there's room to expand on that. There's organizations like Operation Code, which is veterans who have taken initiatives to find non-traditional ways to learn technology. And I think it'd be excellent to partner with them and figure out how we can get veterans who are technologists to be those people in the room making the decisions in technology as well. But also the digital service team does an excellent job because their goal isn't to come in and create technology and leave, and just because obviously it won't last. It's not long lasting, right? It's not sustainable. The goal is to make sure they're integrating with the workforce. And myself as a Presidential Innovation Fellow is to also go in and talk to people, not just people on a higher level, but everyone who's entering data in their databases and asking them, do you know why you are set up to make it in this format? Or is there a better way we can do this? Do you think we are able to change the processes. Because like I said, if we're changing it up at top and not bringing along people with us to implement it, then the change won't last. Another reason is just like as far as excuse me, that's I was going to go into it, but I'll wait until.
And for Sanjay at the SBA, you guys have used, you've done a hackathon where you're actually demonstrating the importance of data and how that can affect real world problems. So can you go into that?
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier about monetizing data in the federal government. So one of the ways we are trying to do that is using hackathons. And so I'll give you a case in point. Within the last 12 months, we've had 3 hackathons. And the idea is we get some data sets. In this case, we are using, so one of the functions that SBA has as part of its mission is support for disasters or disaster mission survivors, disaster survivors. So when Harvey, Irma, and Maria hit 2 years ago, SBA is one of the agencies which provides support to the small businesses and private entrepreneurs as well. So one of the things we figured is how do we use the data that we have available to make it easier for the disaster survivors to process their loan application. So I'll just give you a simple example to kind of churn in your minds, if you will. So let's say you lost your home. All your records that you have, physical records, are lost now. And now you're trying to put in a loan application. So just imagine the situation you are in. You're already in a traumatic situation. Now you're trying to put in a loan application for hopefully trying to recover what you lost and rebuild your life and your homes and your surroundings and everything else. So some of those are the kind of challenges that people who are in that disaster survival mode face. So one of the hackathons we did just last week was part of our National Small Business Week. And so we commenced the National Small Business Week with a hackathon. This was in partnership with one of the financial services company. So we were focused around how can we help disaster survivors look for ways to become more creative in being able to submit their loan applications. We had a great turnout, roughly about 250 people turned out for the hackathon. And we had obviously a lot of prize monies. I wasn't going to go into those details of name people or parties here for various reasons. But the point is, we're trying to use those avenues to encourage use of data and make it meaningful for the citizens, right? That's just a tip of the iceberg. There's many, many more ways we can do that. And so we've been looking at exploring different ways. And I'll give you just another case in point. Part of the Open Data Act, if some of you are probably familiar with, each agency is supposed to publish the data standards that are available for public consumption. But one of the things that happens is that I found out was the way it gets published is through a PDF document. And if any of you are anywhere close to the technology, PDF documents are great. But if you want to do something with that document, you cannot really do anything meaningful from a machine learning standpoint or machine use standpoint. You still have to convert it into a form that a machine can use it, right? So guess where I'm going with that is the fact that we're looking at ways to expose these open data sets in a machine readable format so it's much easier for you to consume the data. So that's just another example of, it's a small example, but I'm sure it'll make a long-lasting impact on the use of these open data sets. And there's a lot more we can talk about. But certainly this is a very rich area in my perspective. And I think there is a lot more to be done across the agencies, across the government, and working with the universities, if you will, working with the private institutions and finding the best ideas and how this can be leveraged in a better way.
Where does quantum computing fit into this conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when it comes to the quantum information science space, right? So when we think about the public-private partnership space and what we're trying to get done, it's worth understanding that the value of data, as Sanjay indicated, is a function of what you can do with it. And if you were aggregating data in 1999, before the advent of deep learning and associated computing power, you may not have appreciated the value of what you're aggregating. But as new computing capability came online, and as a wealth of private sector opportunities emerged, the government had to wise up as well. So in quantum information science, we're looking over the next 10 years of the potential for dramatic new applications which will transform the data landscape. Transform it because you now can do something you could not do before. Value of your data may change dramatically as a consequence. And so, for example, the Department of Energy has a test beds program working with the private sector, because the private sector is doing a lot of work to see how does it impact our businesses in the CIO, CSO role and many other areas as well. But there's also the engagement to build that workforce. And so, for example, the National Science Foundation has this triplets program they've created, which brings universities, government researchers, universities, private sector companies, and interns, but really graduate students together with an eventual transition of that student over to the company after they get their degree to start to build some of the pathways that you need. So if you want someone to be able to evaluate emerging technologies in your CIO role, you have to have someone who's literate on the topic. And one of the ways that you do that is by building connections across many organizations. And then the third thing is how do you, as a whole of industry, come together on a topic? And so the National Institute of Standards and Technology has been working with some private partners to create a quantum economic development consortium, which will, among other things, look at, okay, so what data do we need to collect? Right. And to provide guidance to industry on new applications as they emerge. So these are the type of things that we have to worry about. I will put one thing for everyone here to worry about, which is one of the key things that's going to be happening in this space has not so much to do with the data, but how we protect it. And if you weren't aware, quantum computers have one of the main application spaces is breaking public key cryptography. Yeah. That is underlying our e-commerce system. It's underlying how we store data. It underlies Bitcoin. It underlies blockchain. That is a vulnerability space. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology is involved in an 8-year-long standard setting process for quantum-resistant cryptography, which your organizations will be asked to roll out once that competition is done. And to talk about change, we, at NIST anyway, they estimate that this process is a 20-year process. So we hope that in 24 more years from now, because it started about 4 years ago, we will finally be over to a full quantum-resistant internet infrastructure. And it will be only with the engagement of everyone here that we get that done. So that's, I guess, the last angle that we have to work.
Okay. Does anyone have a question? No? Okay.
Go ahead.
I
didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to ask both of you. I know Sanjay talked about hackathons, and I also love running hackathons and getting outside perspective. And we talk about doing even the competitive and getting different ideas in. And I always struggle with what happens like the day or the week after the hackathon, and you want to bring it back to your organization to implement it long term. Do you have any ideas on how to do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Joy, that question, because I was going to talk about it when I was talking about the hackathon. So one of the examples that we've done is in one of the hackathons we started last year, and we built on it in our second hackathon, and we didn't use that in this third one, is use of chatbots. And so one of the functions we're trying to introduce is for a customer service function to use these chatbots to be able to provide some basic responses. Obviously, right now, you're limited to the humans and then the times and everything else. And if you're in multiple time zones, that becomes a challenge. I don't want to go further into that, but common questions. So we have a knowledge base about from where our customer service people are providing responses. So we've got this chatbot that we are now trying to experiment in using it, and we're going to start building on it. And there's many, many more such, ideas that generated out of the hackathons. And the ones that seem more promising for us from what I call is a customer-facing or citizen-facing aspect, we start building on it and try and bring that same thing that was developed in the hackathon and build it further in the second hackathon. Or we do some innovation sprints inside of SBA and continue to build on that. Because the idea is to generate something which is of meaningful value, and it can be deployed, and it can be used. Some of those are more longer-term applications, some are more near-term. So the near-term ones is what we are continuing to nurture and build on so we can apply them. It's just not doing a hackathon for the sake of hackathon and having a big, a splash about it and a prize and everything else, but it is how do you apply it, what you generated from there. So yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd actually like to also amplify that a little bit, which is that it's a great challenge in the government space to encourage the concept of an innovation ecosystem, internal to the organization. We do often look to private sector innovation as a way to get the innovation rolled in, bring in your consultant team, and then they help you solve the problem. But we have very specific problems, right? And it is developing that culture of encouraging that innovation and encouraging some lower level risk taking that enables the prototyping and the like. So, in terms of one of the other things that you do is you, on the policy side, take the time to acknowledge that challenge. so that the management chains, coming back to the previous panel's point about it has to start from the top as well as from the bottom. Right, so it's a two-sided process. So on the one hand, you do the hackathons. The other hand, you also get a high-scale directive saying we encourage innovation in the government. Right, like you have specific problems, you want to try something new, great. And so I think we have to examine both of these angles.
Okay. Yeah. Where do you see emerging technology fitting in?
Well, I'm not going to take this because that's all I do.
Yours is basically emerging, right?
Yes,
Quantum
absolutely.
computing.
I could probably give a little example of how we are using data and some emerging technologies and applying them in the environment. Specifically, let me talk about cybersecurity. And so we have deployed a series of cloud-native tools which are helping us manage our cybersecurity posture for the SBA. So I'll give you a simple example of how some of these tools come with things like machine learning as part of their tool capabilities. So example is, over a period of time, these tools develop a user profile. And I'll give you a simple example. Let's say I log into Washington, D.C. office every day at 8 o'clock. I'm logging out at 5 p.m., and that's my regular pattern. So the tool has built a profile for me that this is where I come in, this is the time, this is the place that I log in from. And if it detects an anomaly from that, so let's say I'm in LA next day, and then I'm logging in from LA, and it's not on a SBA network. So it'll automatically detect the anomaly and say, well, that's not part of your user pattern of how you use your resources or computing resources, and they'll flag an alert for me to look at. Let me give you another example. Is a very simple example when you hear it, but if you kind of think about it, it sort of makes a lot of sense. So for example is, let's say I log in here at 8 a.m. in Washington, D.C., and then my login is used from LA at, say, 8:30 a.m. And so you can imagine, I know quantum computing is being worked on, but time travel is still not quite there. I could not be in LA and Washington, D.C. within a span of 30 minutes, right? So what that does is it flags you an alert to say that's an improbable travel activity, right? And it gives you an indication to say that, look, maybe you want to check on this, and maybe if this is truly happening, maybe my credentials have been compromised, and somebody from another location has now hijacked my credentials, right, as an example, right? So just you can imagine some of these are the examples of the use of these tools. They're being applied, and these tools are helping us, obviously, in this case, improve our cybersecurity posture for SBA. And probably more examples I can go into, but I'll let Joy probably give some more ideas from what she's seen.
Yeah, not even as far as specifics, but just the ideology of, like, we talk about giving employees time and space to innovate. I can imagine when you are employed in any agency, this is your job, please go do it quickly and efficiently. And the way I work with the fellows, but also just the technology transformation services at large, along with the U.S. Digital Service team, is we kind of have this luxury to carve in space and time to think of other different ways about solving technology problems and working with people, where there are several other fellows within VA, and we're all in different departments, whether it's education or benefits or veterans experience, and we're able to work together on the side and talk about what other divisions are doing. And I don't think that every employee in the VA has that luxury of knowing, well, what are you doing? Even if it's an office across the street or down the block, but just having this luxury of getting together and talking about ways we're working together, and we can work with our fellow departments and getting together on that. But yeah, just creating space for people to have great ideas, even if it's a hackathon during the day or the work day within your own agency, having times to brainstorm and design think.
So we do have one more minute, and I want to check again to see if anybody else has a question. There's one back there.
Thanks. This question's for Jake. Where are we on the development curve for quantum computing? Just curious where you see the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's a great question. And someone who worked for Gartner before?
Yeah.
So you're probably familiar with this concept of the hype curve. Who here knows what the vertical axis of the hype curve is? Exactly. It's an undefined axis. So I will say that when we look at quantum information science, which includes quantum sensors, which are deployed right now, like the Global Positioning System is a network of atomic clocks, right? It includes quantum simulation, which is something that's happening in the laboratory right now. It includes quantum computation, where you can do very small-scale experiments, actually even on the cloud. And it includes quantum networking. And I listed it in this order because that is the order of technological surprise, least surprise to most surprise. The anticipation that we have right now is that in quantum computing, the one you hear the most about, it's at least 10 years out before you get significant revenue that can be generated in that space. And so, you know, in terms of the hype curve, if you're investing in this saying, this is going to transform my problem space in the next 2 years, it's early. But if you're getting that literacy about the problem, then you will be aware of advances that are happening that become mission relevant. One of the stories that I hear told a lot has to do with how companies fail. And the primary failure mechanism for companies is an evolutionary failure mechanism, which is they are not changing as things happen on the slow time scale. It's not the revolutionary things, not the disruptive stuff that you often hear about. It's just missing the boat. And so the concept here in QIS, as we assess it, is that right now you have to be evaluating, does this technology impact my mission space in the 5-year horizon, or the 10-year horizon, or never? And for many cases, if you have really hard problems that you know your classical compute cannot solve, that is a scenario where quantum computing could make an impact. And if your problem is you have too much data or not enough data, your problem is you have too many people complaining, you know, there's many other problems you may run into, but if it's not a really hard problem, it's unlikely that quantum computing will impact you directly. Modulo quantum resistant crypto, which is going to be for everyone to have to handle the next 10 years.
Any others? Right down in the front, and this will be our last one.
So we love collecting data. We love collecting lots of data, and we're collecting more and more data all the time. But what it really comes down to is we have these trusted sources. We still have data silos. And those are a couple of reasons. First, I trust that data. Second of all, it looks like something I understand. Where are we at in getting across those silos so that we can follow the dots, we can follow the breadcrumbs to things that, you know, whether, and they say in the dark world, that needle in the haystack and find that. And it doesn't always have to be intelligence. It can be in marketing, and it can be in a lot of different things. Where are we at in that, finding that path across those silos?
Actually, I have a short comment, which is, you know, when I visit Silicon Valley, the general complaint is that everyone's working on ad tech, right? And ad tech is trying to find the hay in the hay. So we're doing really well at that. But I'll pass for the needle question to someone else.
I'll probably give an answer just from our perspective at the SBA. Yes, there are silos even within our agency, and we're trying to get to a common core data model and a single version of the truth. I think it is a problem which has been built over many, many years, and it's probably going to take significant effort to overcome. The notion of this is my data and I have full ownership of it continues to exist, unfortunately, and it probably exists, I'm sure, across agencies as well. There could be more data sharing because, like I was saying earlier, if you start thinking about data as a digital currency, the currency of the digital world, that changes the whole notion of that. And you talk about, you know, trusted sources of data. Yes, you have to have a single version of truth, and you have to be able to access it from this trusted source of data source. And you have to have confidence that this is trustworthy, if you will. And that's somewhere where Jake was talking about. Quantum computing is used in the bad way, if you will, to break the crypto or the encryptions, but it's also used for the positive side of it as well. So I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question, sir, but I think it's a problem. It needs to be addressed. I think I can only answer from my perspective. We're trying to do it across our agency, and we're starting to see some of the results there when we have shown some visualization of common data elements across different program offices, and they see the light of saying, oh, that's the same program data that I'm dealing with. So if you think about it, we have different programs. We service the customers, the citizens, if you will, and they look at it from their perspective only. And you say, well, it's the same customer, but you're looking at it from a narrow perspective. This is a veteran. This is a women-owned business. This is an 8A program. This is a hub zone. But they all could be the same intersection as well, right? So after we've given some illustrations or illuminations on that, We're seeing some traction from a program officer say, yeah, I necessarily don't need to own this data as long as you make it available for me. And as long as I can do what I need to do, I'm fine with it being in some singular data repository which can be then shared. I do believe there's a lot of potential for sharing of data because that's really where the value of data comes in, to your point about connecting the dots. You cannot do that if you are sitting in a small siloed world. You have to be able to connect the dots across different domains and different data sets, and that's where you discover and uncover some of the correlations which you had never thought about.
I'd just like to amplify there that if you're not familiar with data.gov, right, that is a resource on the public side for curated, supportable data sets for general use.
All right. Well, perfect. If these guys stick around for the networking hour, I'm sure you can strike up many conversations from this. And thanks for joining us.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us. That's the end of our panel, but as Amy alluded to, we have our networking hour here. We still have some coffee and some breakfast. I guess it could be called brunch networking hour at this point. But before we go our separate ways there, one thing I wanted to do, first I wanted to thank our team for putting this all together. It's more than just a couple of us. So actually, you guys got to meet them a little bit during the earlier breakfast hour. But could I have our researchers stand up? We have our 4 researchers and our 4 capabilities. We have James Mursall, Connor Collins, Abby Blue, and Faith Ryan. If anybody in this room, as part of our mission is really to collect research, and then part of that is collecting those research inquiries. So if anybody in this room has any questions or anything where we could follow up with, please reach out to my team here. They'll be at the different high tops throughout on cybersecurity, data, digital, and IT transformation, like I said earlier. So thank you very much to that. The second thing I wanted to mention was our next event is our Acquisition Innovation CXO Tech Forum. We're really excited about this. This is a topic that seems to cross many of the CXO Tech Forums that we have there, and that's going to be on June 20th. It's going to be, again, over at the Observation Deck, which is over in Roslyn, top of the CEB Tower. A gorgeous spot. It's going to be warm enough for us to open the patio as well, so I'd really encourage everybody to join us for that. With that, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for joining us this morning, and look forward to speaking with everybody out in the foyer over there. Thank you.